And the whole idea of the grass and the concrete, Solzhenitsyn said it well. He said, if we were to cover the entire world in concrete, there would be a blade of grass that would make its way through. And I think of it this way, the concrete could be, let's consider it as a metaphor for all the horrific things that have happened. And not only is there external concrete, where it is codified in the law form, economic issues, spiritual, there's so many different things that we could, so many layers of that concrete externally, but there's also internal concrete that we all have, that we all deal with. In terms of am I capable? Am I stupid? Can I do this? You know, all the stuff. If you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. Because to be a parent is to experience guilt. It's that internal concrete inside of, and did I do it right? Am I doing this correctly? To be married, to be in relationship with other people. We all bump into the concrete that's internally. But then you add the external stuff. It just compounds it. And create such an environment that is so difficult. It robs the human spirit of whatever that it is that we all yearn and search for in terms of freedom and to be noticed, to be accepted, and all the things that happen as part of our desire as humans. And so we have the different things that we can take a look at some of these very quickly, because this provides a context. The slave trade, most people don't even realize, don't even understand the Arab slave trade that has been going on for some 1,300 years, around 650 AD, 650 and beyond. Tens of millions from Central Africa, from Eastern Africa. You know, just to think of the concrete that has been laid down. And then we can take a look at the, of course, this triangle slave trade, the European slave trade, and the slavery itself, the fugitive slave laws, where we have so many different things that were going on with people coming north, and then the fugitive slave laws coming in place where actually what they did is that they would say that there would be a fine if a marshal, a U.S. marshal, or a policeman didn't actually confront someone of African descent and say, do you have your papers? Are you free? If they didn't take them in, or if they didn't question them, there would be a fine. And then there would be a reward if they were found to be a fugitive slave. So there's terrible things that emerged around the fugitive slave laws that really put a lot of pressure on police force in the northern area. The Civil War, you know, we have, of course, we're going to talk just a moment about the Emancipation Proclamation. In the back, I have a copy straight from one of the originals. 25 copies were made, and this is a reproduction straight from one of the original copies of the Emancipation Proclamation. It was done in September of 1862, some 100 days or so before the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st of 1863. And it was kind of like Lincoln's trial balloon to see, you know, what are we, how can we do this? Just after the Battle of Antietam, and there was going back and forth. The South was winning, the North was winning, and it just seemed like who's going to win this thing? What's the outcome going to be? And so Lincoln put up that trial balloon in September of 1862 just to see if the cabinet would be going along for the ride, and to see what's happening. But to also to send a signal to France and to Britain: don't you mess with aiding and abetting the South, because if you do, you're basically, we are now making a proclamation about slavery in this country. And because you both have abolished it officially, then you'd be going against something that's legal. So in some senses, the Emancipation Proclamation was a toothless document. But in other senses, it had a lot of teeth to it, because it was designed kind of like shooting across the bow of the international community. Don't you mess with this, because the Great Britain loved getting cotton from the South, and they were beginning to lean in the direction of helping financially with munitions. And Google this, the Alabama claims. The Alabama claims show that Great Britain still covertly behind the scenes was helping with ships for the South. And so some really crazy things going on. But the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. But in Reconstruction, you have the Freedmen's Bureau, and it's kind of like, how are we going to bring all the individuals who have been slaves all these decades and all these years, how are we going to bring them into society? And so you had the southern position and the northern position, and in order to enforce it in the South, you had to bring in soldiers in the South to enforce it, because prior to the 13th Amendment, there were black codes. And this is, I mean, it was just this the way we deal with people of color in the South. And it didn't even have to be written down. This is just kind of like an unconscious way of dealing with things. When Reconstruction was introduced, those black codes had to go. They had to be enforced. And then you had Hayes and Tilden. Remember in 1876, the election? Tilden, from the South, he was actually the one who won the popular vote. But electorally, he was not the president. And so what happened is once again, if you want to Google this and search more into this, that Hayes and Tilden, they got into a back room and they made a deal. And the deal is this: Hayes can become president, but we're going to take 3,000 troops out of the South. We're going to take all this enforcement that we put on there, basically stopping Reconstruction, stopping the law, stopping the effect of the 13th Amendment, stopping the impact of the Emancipation Proclamation, and it just left it wide open for Pandora's box to be opened, for all the wickedness and the horrific nature of the black codes to come back, not just the way they were before, but now in greater force and with greater intentionality to destroy and to rip people of color apart and families apart, and to create that concrete in a more codified way. And so you have that. That's part of the concrete. And then the Jim Crow laws. Do you know where the beginnings of Jim Crow came? It all started. The name Jim Crow is Big Daddy Rice. Back in the early 1800s, he was a performer. And he would put blackface, they put burnt cork or some other type of stuff on their faces, and perform in a minstrelsy scene. And what would happen is that he had heard or seen, there's variations of stories about this, but had seen someone perform this song called Jump Jim Crow. And he got such an electric response from the audience the first time he did this in the Pittsburgh area, in a theater, that it became part of his act. Then other blackface performers would do the same song in other ways in their particular acts, and it became a code word, if you will, for Jim Crow laws when the laws came more in force, economic and judicial laws to enforce the anti-African American approach, if you will, just to say that you cannot vote, you cannot do this, cannot do that, and we will cut you out here, cut you out there, in order to continue to do what we've always been doing, and just up front. And so Depression, where blacks were hired last and fired first, the struggle for civil rights, and basically, prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, we had, I don't have time because I've gotten the signal here that I've got to bring this plane in for a landing, but I just want to say this one quick thing about Harriet Tubman. Did you know that when she was 15, she was in a store, and there was another young slave who was escaping, and the individual who was there with that young slave was so incensed, he said to Harriet, "Grab him, hold on to him so I can beat him up." And she refused. And what happens, he just, when he was if someone's enraged, he just kind of reached for whatever's there. It is a 2-pound weight. He threw it, missed the young man, and hit her in the temporal lobe. And here's what very few people know, is that she suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy for the rest of her life, which means that she would be talking with somebody and suddenly fall asleep for 10 minutes and then pick up the conversation. Can you imagine leading 19 times going into the South to bring slaves out, some 300 slaves in all, and having this impediment in her life, not knowing if right in the midst of pursuit she's going to fall asleep, going to kick in. I'll tell you, this woman was remarkable.